Welcome everyone, thanks for being here. I'd like to start by thanking Peter for welcoming me to the chair about 4 months ago, which has already been a great intellectual adventure. My name is Yasar. I joined the chair last year from the London School of Economics. We are going to do this in English because the chair is very bilingual actually, so every day we switch between English and French, and I think that kind of reflects the spirit of our work as well. But if you want to say anything in French, of course, or from the audience, we'll take some questions if we have some time at the end. So I work on AI risk and AI regulation, so it was very tempting to actually speak on artificial intelligence, but we have a grande conférence coming up at the end of the day, so we decided to center this panel on technological change and questions around uncertainty, technological change, and regulation. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers, with whom I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, Doa and Antoinette. Antoinette A.Rouvroy is a permanent research associate at the Belgian National Fund for Scientific Research, FNRS, and she's also a senior researcher at the Research Center for Information, Law and Society at the Law Faculty of University of Namur. M.Girel to my right, thanks to this panel, I've had the pleasure of discovering your work as well. He's a maître de conférence in philosophy générale at ENS here. And last but not least, D.Abu-Alyounes. She's a program specialist in the ethics of AI at UNESCO. So our panel will hopefully be bringing together theory and practice when it comes to digitalization and uncertainty. So I'd like to before I start, J.Atif will unfortunately not be able to join us today because he's ill. Yeah, it would have been a great addition to our panel, but yeah, so you had 4 of us as a result. Okay, so I'd like to start first with you, Antoinette. So you work extensively on technological change and regulation, and the legal and epistemic implications of technological change. And I wanted to ask you, how do you engage with the uncertainty created by technological change in your own work?
Well, in my own work, or in my own obsessions with algorithmic governmentality, on which I've been working for several years now, in fact, I don't consider so much risks created by new digital technologies, or what I call the algorithmic turn. I rather consider the algorithmic turn as being a symptom of changes in the way we deal with uncertainty. So I mean, our taste for the algorithmic turn, for algorithmic governmentality, for automatization of decision and so on, is a symptom of a wish to overcome cognitive and political impasses in the context of polycrisis. So it's the belief that, in fact, acute instabilities of our environment, of acute complexity and urgency are so important, so acute, that the human mind cannot deal with them. So that's the reason why we tend to project on algorithmic black boxes the utopia that black boxes may solve the uncertainties that we cannot even represent. So it's really the symptom of a crisis of representability of radical uncertainty. And how does it work? It works by translating what I would call, but we can discuss more about that, ontological indeterminacy, the residue of incompressive uncertainty, that which, the uncertainty that is even beyond probabilities, that the uncertainties that resist calculation of probability. There is an attempt to translate that into an epistemic uncertainty that we dream correcting or rejoining through data. more data, upscaling in computation, more data, more computation, more energy consumption, and that's the dream, you know, of repairing that gap, that écart of which you told about, that écart, to do away with the écart. So for me, if you wish, there is a kind of, I would say, a metaphysical gesture there. A metaphysical gesture which consists of doing away with ontological indeterminacy, but in a way, in fact, that does not suppress uncertainty, but displaces the burden of uncertainty. Because through algorithmization, in fact, algorithmization is a way to transform uncertainty rather than as a burden, as a stop to impose to intentional action. It rather extends the possibility of action even over something that escapes calculation of probabilities. So it means that those who have the possibility to have a lot of data, to accumulate a lot of data, a lot of computation power and so on, they gain much more power, but this puts all the rest of us in an increased vulnerability and increased precarity. Because what? Because we don't relate to the world through identifiable norms or even averages or probabilities, but rather the metrics and the categories through which we perceive and try to manage uncertainty have become completely opaque. Not only completely opaque, but completely plastic, depending on a kind of absolutization of contingency. So that's the reason why I just give just one small example. It's a small example that has been given to me by Mark Dutfield in the field of humanitarian action. In humanitarian action, already in the 80s, he noticed that in the famine in Sudan, there was a change in dealing with the famine of humanitarian workers. He called this the complexity thinking. The complexity thinking came to replace analysis of structural reasons for famine. So it meant that instead of going on place and trying to find the reasons for the phenomena, a lot of data, a multitude of data were collected and then made ready for detection of correlations, patterns, and models. This changed a lot because it reconfigured the Sudan as a field of emergence of stress signals. And that's all that matters, stress signals. So it also meant that instead of going on place and listening to people speaking of their own problems, people were rather incentivized to become resilient. Becoming resilient means to adapt individually to something that cannot be translated into a language of a community, you see? So it's really a shift that, in fact, it's a bit neoliberal, if you wish. Everyone has to become very, very resilient. So it's the disinterest for causes of phenomena and rather exclusive focus on effects. This changed radically. This redistributes, if you wish, the burden of uncertainty. Another example on the other chain. I take an extreme example: high frequency trading. they use algorithms in order not to gain knowledge, but to gain insight. An insight is something that is completely different from knowledge, because an insight is a way to act. It's an operational image that allows you to act in an ecology of ignorance. You don't know anything, but you receive alerts, buy or sell or something like that, very quick, and then you react. You see, and this is a huge empowerment. It empowers some actors to act beyond their own knowledge through. It's because it's very fast, and to take a coup d'avance, always a coup d'avance on their adversaries. So I'm too long, no?
Let's maybe move on, and we'll come back to the excellent points you're making, especially how do we organically create and maintain the identifiable norms in society is a question I'd like to come back to. But now I'd like to turn to Matthias. Thank you very much, Antoinette. I know you have some thoughts on the matters that Antoinette highlighted.
Yeah.
So please take it away.
Thank you. Of course, there is much overlap, but before talking, I would just like to say a few words. It will not be long, but for me, it's a great moment now, because I was sitting on the Conseil Scientifique next to Frédéric when this collaboration was approved, and so for me, it's something to be now 10 years after, and all the more because Peter mentioned, of course, the administrative adventures of the chair, but we are very glad to have it as a member of the Cavaillés team that I am coordinating for a long time now. And I see some of them, the doctoral students are highly valued members of the meetings that we have. So for me, I'm very glad to share this moment with you. And so my take is a bit different, even if I have some of the same conclusions. In my work, I approach uncertainty pragmatically, not as a mere lack of information. That was the deficit model, and it's still very much alive, I must say. So it's not a lack of information, but as something that can be actively produced, managed, and distributed across institutions and technologies. So it can be the subject matter of strategies, when you try and manipulate uncertainty or to foster uncertainty in some parts of the public. So there are strategies, and in my work in ignorance studies, I've been dealing with this kind of strategies. And sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it's a result of our research agenda or some particularity of our institutions or institutional designs. So that's my take, or the way I meet the general question of this day. And in my work on ignorance, I argue that technologies often reorganize uncertainty rather than reduce it. So that might be also a kind of meeting point. And of course, it becomes an ethical and political problem when, for example, the shift is a shift away from producers towards users, publics, or vulnerable groups. We are not facing uncertainty all in the same way, or there is a distribution of the problem of uncertainty in society. And so in philosophy, my main work is to identify zones of organized ignorance and to reconnect uncertainty with actual practices of inquiry, of research, of attention, and of collective judgment, which is extremely important. And so more recently, I've been working a lot in varieties of disinformation, which increase confusion, that are not only spreading false narratives, but also increasing, and that are designed to promote confusion. And it's an extremely important topic, because when you are swimming in confusion, that interferes with the very way we assess and face uncertainty. So perhaps I'll stop here, but that's my take. And so, yeah, not only reducing uncertainty, but also a redistribution and reorganization of it.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Doa, I will now turn to you. Yeah, if you could pass on the microphone. Thank you. Before we come back to the more high-level and conceptual problems we're facing, Doa has a lot of experience dealing with uncertainty created by technological change in practice, and how do we also integrate societal desires, let me put it that way, in the question of technological governance. So if you could share some of that experience and how you deal with this on a day-to-day basis, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. Well, I think if I want to be very short, I can say that uncertainty and risk created by technology is actually what pays my salary. So, but no, I mean, I guess UNESCO, I work in an international organization, so my perspective is very practical, how we come to this topic. So since its establishment at UNESCO, we have been working on setting standards in the form of recommendations, declarations, treaties, so legal documents for governing ethics and of science and technology and in emerging technology more generally. So in the beginning, it was more in the topic of bioethics, that we were working in bioethics and human rights, continuing with climate change, and since 2021, ethics of artificial intelligence, and most recently, since 2025, ethics of neurotechnology. So every couple of years, we have an emerging technology that kind of, the uncertitude it creates and the risk it poses kind of open up this opportunity to have this, bring in the multilateral discussions into the need to create a document, like a recommendation on the governance. And it always I did my PhD before in governance of AI, and it always starts with this panic moment, right? Is AI going to take over the world? I started my studies in 2016, and there were back then media news showing how AI discriminate between black and white defendants in the US, discriminate between men and women when it comes to job recruitment, and becomes very kind of racist. There was a bot that even again in 2016, it's 10 years ago thinking about it, a bot produced by Microsoft that became super racist and xenophobic in 24 hours because it just learned what the best of the internet has to offer. So it's this like panic moments that brings the world and companies, blame towards companies on the need for them to act, but mainly on the governments to say, oh, we need to do something, but we also don't want to be too radical and stop the technology from evolving. So let's agree on a non-binding instrument, in the form of a UN recommendation. So, I mean, I also want to highlight that while each one of the instruments that we are working on is more specialized toward the technology it's aiming to address, there is still a lot of commonalities because ethics is at the core of our work. And ethics is an interesting angle because it enables us to focus on kind of the values that are anchored into law, like human rights, but also to broaden the perspective and talk also about values like fairness and transparencies that are not at least immediately associated with a human right. So there are a lot of commonalities between the ethical principles that govern different technologies. So if you look at proportionality, for example, as a philosophical, as an ethical principle, you would find it in the recommendation that we have both in AI, in climate change, and in neurotechnology, because it's a lot about the balance between the risks and the opportunities. I think it was called before a positive risk in the introduction that the technology has to offer. So while we think that each technology is opening up the door to a completely new world, and it's true because there are differences between the different types of technologies that we are seeing arising in the upcoming in the years. But also I think there is a lot to learn, and I guess you both might agree with from all the philosophical studies and the history of interpreting and explaining those principles, because no matter if you're dealing with an AI-based system or an AI and a more advanced AI system that's connected to our neurons and learn from that, we always want to make sure that like fairness and things like fairness and proportionality lie at the bottom of the design. And I mean, a last point perhaps to mention is that always, because negotiating with member states is very intense. If any of you have been involved or watching those negotiations, we always try to develop instruments that can stand the test of time. Because the moment we were working on artificial intelligence in 2021, nobody thought about mentioning anything about large language modules or agentic AI. But now you cannot even think about almost a classic AI example without mentioning those topics. So what is the challenge of creating a legal document that's strong on one hand, but on the other hand leave room for evolution and for different understanding of the technology is something that we were trying to address. Maybe I'll stop here and
thank you. Thank you very much, Doa. So I'll turn back to you, Antoinette, because what Doa said, and I know she's concerned with that really on a day-to-day basis, is that there might actually be some shared identifiable norms on which we build some governance mechanisms that are actually going to skew the balance more favorably towards the people versus the creators of the technology and those who push them to us. So any thoughts on that? Do you see that in action in your work, or maybe in some of the European regulations that are now coming out, like the Digital Services Act, like the AI Act, or any further thoughts on this from your side? Thank you.
Of course, in the European Union, we are presented worldwide as champions of regulation.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. For some people, it just means that we are so crap in technology that the only thing we have is regulation. Sometimes, but I don't buy that. I struggle against that. In fact, what is instauring itself in Europe through the Digital Service Act, Digital Market Act, AI Act, and so on, is, I think, because I want to be, I want to believe in the future. I want to be an utopist. I think we can present that to ourselves. We must present that to ourselves as the birth of a European digital constitutionalism. What is it? Digital constitutionalism is a way. It's not an anti-American antitrust, as it has been presented in the U.S. at the recent hearings at the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress. In fact, it's the refusal of the European Union, which is a legal sovereignty, which the European Union has built itself as legal sovereignty. It's a sovereignty without territory, without an army, without much technology, but it's built through law, through the capacity of the European people, whoever that is, to recognize themselves and relate themselves through law, through the force of law. And it's a juris-generative entity. And the European Union must stick on that, meaning that it should not accept to be regulated by the norms of platforms in terms of its own public space, for example, maintaining the space of European democracy and regulating the digital market ex ante rather than ex post, deciding of the rules that must be applied by companies from the US, for example, who in fact exercise an incredible constitutive power on our European public space, digital public space. It's not protectionism. It's not discrimination against American companies. It's a way just to protect the possibility for the European Union to remain legally sovereign on its own territory. So that's a very important point. On the other side, what I see is well, these are powerful instruments. RGPD, Digital Service Act, Digital Market Act. That's very powerful. But at the same time, the risk is through, for example, the digital omnibus regulation, the wish already, to render all this a little bit less applicable, a little bit more supple, a little bit, to erode. And that's what I call the becoming polycritical of law. Law itself, European law itself, stops considering itself as, it becomes, if you wish, a bit hollow, because it wavers its self-instituting character, as institution of the European people through law, in order to become a way to adjust to powers and to rules of the play which it has not decided. You see, it's and then if you see also the declaration on European digital sovereignty that has been signed by all member states in Berlin recently, what you see is a bit frightening as well. Democracy comes at the end as a kind of concession of last minute, Democracy is also important. Democracy, human rights, and so on. But the most important thing is competitivity, the race to AI. So they agree to participate in a race of which they have not decided the rules of. You see? So I think we must fight against that tendency to, the European Union law is not a variable of adjustment to requirements of, be them geopolitical and so on, or it is also that, of course. It's a way of de-risking. It's also that, but it cannot be only that. If it becomes that, it becomes a mere learning machine itself, and then the risk is to replace the rule of law by the rule of flaws. If the only important thing, the thing most important, is not to interrupt the flows, because we are so dependent on flows coming from everywhere. Then, yeah. And another thing, just on AI, it makes me anxious when I see that AI, especially ethics of AI becomes the dominant rhetoric through which governance of innovation is talked about. Ethics is not law. I like ethics. I like ethics very much, but I like more politics. I think we need more politics, we need ethics, but we need politics. Because for the moment, what I have the impression is that ethics is often enlisted in the same instrumental reason it seeks to govern in a way. Because we need ethics of AI. Why? Because we have already considered that AI will govern our lives. Then we have to make AI trustworthy, okay? But the question that is never asked is whether we want, in the first place, the authority of AI on our lives, no matter how virtuous, ethic, and so on it is. So we really need to stick to that, the idea of Claude Lefort that, in fact, democracy institutes itself and depends for its own maintenance of the maintaining of indeterminacy at its core. And that indeterminacy, that gap, that is precisely not something that we have to fill with data, with algorithm, with ethics. It's something that must remain like that, which is not resolvable and that we should not even try to resolve. But it is, Lacan would call it the real, it is that core of negativity, that core of obscurity that makes us think, that makes us relate to others, that makes us underwrite in insurances. That's the reason why writing is so important. Writing is also always a way to promise. It's writing and underwriting are technologies of temporalization, which we need to master, which we cannot abandon to no matter how intelligent, smart, and virtuous AIs are. Sorry.
No, sorry to stop you, but I just didn't want the moment of democracy with uncertainty at its core, that powerful moment to go away. So I just wanted to turn to Matthias and ask if you had any thoughts on that, and then I will turn to Doa, of course, because she needs to respond to your points about law and
which
ethics.
part, sovereignty or?
No, but democracy with uncertainty at its core, because you mentioned that what technology does is to shift uncertainty, but how does that happen? But also, how do we? My question is, sorry, I'm asking a selfish question now, but what do we do to empower people in this, age of technological dependency, essentially?
Yeah, but in that case, it's also related to the problem of sovereignty, because I think that, okay, in terms, I'm no expert in geopolitics, but if sovereignty is understood only in terms of hardware, for example, or platforms, or even sometimes institutions, Europe might be late in some dimensions. But there is another important dimension, which would be epistemic sovereignty. Not in an autarcic way, but I think it's extremely important because it means maintaining public capacities for inquiry, access to models, transparency requirements, strong independent research, and some part of institutionalized doubt. By which I mean there must be a place in society where we can publicly express what we do ignore at some stage. And this should be our own problem, or common property. And in fact, we are still trying to assess whether what has been called the fourth paradigm of science is a reality or not. Just to make a long story short, the people who are using that term, they think that there was perhaps a stage in science dominated by empirical observations, then the rule of theories, Newton, Maxwell, etc. Then the rule of models and simulation, and then it was 10, 15 years ago, data-intensive science research. So perhaps the notion is disputable, but the fact is that this notion is powerful. It originated in the corporate world, publications by Microsoft Research, for example, and it involved some of the phenomena that we face today when we think about democracy and epistemic sovereignty, because so the important thing is that the scientists face a flood of data. This requires very heavy infrastructures to deal with this kind of data. It is oriented most of the times towards impact, which might be a good thing in some cases, not always. And sometimes a division of labor between people who would collect observations and people who would deal, who would analyze the observations. And if whatever we think of the fourth paradigm, if that is in some ways our situation, you can see that you have many vulnerabilities that are important for democracies. If the clouds, for example, are physically located elsewhere or monopolized, and that or scientists cannot have a secured access to the data, you can see that it becomes a problem for European epistemic sovereignty. Same thing with transparency. And so it's a subject matter that is drawing a lot of interest. So in terms of sovereignty and also under what has been called, I don't know if you know the term, cognitive war, a notion that is taken very seriously by our own Department of Defense. In science fiction, perhaps you know of the three-body problem, you know, the sci-fi series. But there is now a research project that is finishing, the project Spreads, led by Cléo Collomb, and they are exploring scenarios where one state could try and derail, hamper, corrupt the science of the opponent. It's not conspiracy theory. It's a really important matter now for the Agence d'Innovation de Défense. And so that's the context of the question I'm trying to frame. And I think that if we subscribe to a part of this description, Europe could, a democratic Europe, could lead by protecting what I would call spaces of uncertainty. I think it's very importantly related to democratic deliberation. Places where automated decisions remain contestable by real people, and where democratic deliberation is not replaced by predictions. Because at the end of the day, we deliberate about the uncertain, not about the necessary, and not about what is strictly beyond our grasp. And so restoring and maintaining spaces of uncertainty, I think it's a core issue for a democratic approach to these problems.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I'd like to now turn to Doa. Coming back to Antoine's points about law versus ethics, because Doa is a lawyer by training as well. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Is there a battle? Does one reinforce the other? Any thoughts?
Yeah, like Antoinette, I also like laws. I mean, as a lawyer, I think I have to. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree in terms of it's important to make the distinction between, it's not that the AI need to be ethical, it is the governance, it is the use, it's the development of the AI that we aspire for it to be ethical. Because it's not, I mean, AI as a technology cannot be, it's not a human. It cannot be given, you know, the attribution, the characteristic of a human. That's why, I mean, it's all about splitting the responsibility. So it's the government that have to play part in the ethical governance, in putting the rules, in the companies that have to. Well, I guess it's the governments that need to set up rules for the company, so they are binded by the rules for ethical development. And indeed, it is one of the first principle of ethics, the proportionality that I already mentioned, is ask, the first question we ask is that, is AI, are we achieving more with automation than what we have achieved before? I think if we take like a very simple example of, well, it's not simple, but it's a very common example of automating social services, allocation of social services and applications and things like that. We take away a very important factor, this like unwritten rules about the interaction between the human, between the citizens demanding the services and the people, the public servants evaluating their application. And if you put that into and those public servants are subjected to criteria that they have to apply. The application has never been, you know, super subjective. There has to be objectivity. There are laws and rules that govern it, but it's about taking that kind of unmediated relations and putting it into a machine that makes it very very difficult, and there are many examples for how that is difficult, how automating this kind of processes makes it more difficult to reach social services. So that's the first question. What do we achieve more from automation? Is that neutrality that we are looking for? Sure, everyone have their own biases, but the AI is a replica of that. Is it a more consistency between application that we are? So that's the first question that we have to answer. Is the automation indeed the right place? So I agree with you, Antoinette, about that. And if we broaden this to the geopolitical considerations that have been discussed, I think we are living in a very interesting moment because of what's happening in the world in general. But if you already mentioned that in Europe, the tension between kind of regulation versus innovation, and then the omnibus, the digital omnibus, and the trine, is that a response to a geopolitical? Because I think it has always been. I mean, the AI Act has been in the making for a while. GDPR has been there for 10 years now. So there hasn't been a hesitation before, at least on the European side, for this tendency, which is I again agree with you that it does not. I mean, the regulation is not a blocker for an innovation. There hasn't been. Is the digital omnibus kind of a response to this very big pressure that we are seeing around the world or in certain areas? To go against regulation, and we have. I mean, I just want to also say that like we are working with 193 countries from all around the world, and many countries of those are not in the Europe or in North America. So needs are different. When we talk about regulation, like the GDPR, it became somehow a norm in many countries around the world, but because they want to make business with Europe. But I think it's important to also consider that the geopolitics of that. Like, do we want really a Brussels effect of digital regulations around the world? And the price of compliance that we put on other countries because, again, of the need to compete in European markets, and the expectations of compliance are quite expensive, and they're not the same everywhere. So, I just think it's very important to also not forget that aspect, that we have a lot more than Europe and the US in the world, and we have to consider that in a big kind of geopolitical discussion, and also on what is done by companies or countries in terms of like where the regulations doesn't exist, in terms of training system, collecting data, things like that. If it hasn't been complicated enough.
Thank you very much, Doa. I'd like to turn to you now, Antoinette. We have a few more minutes, and I'd like to take 10 minutes to get some questions from the audience as well. So, in a few sentences, of course, feel free to respond to anything Doa and Matthias said, but also maybe let's end the panel with a forward-looking kind of perspective. And I'm really glad you used utopia when you're thinking about the future, and Doa said interesting. So maybe we're not so pessimistic, but it's also a moment for us to think about the future of the chair and the future research trajectory. So. Any thoughts on that based on what we've discussed? Thank you very much.
Yes, just a quick response. I agree with you that, for example, the barriers that European digital constitutionalism constitutes for others, for example, for technologies coming from the global south, for example, should maybe not be there, because these barriers had been thought in constitutional terms against powers like the ones I call hyper agents, who combine financial capital, technological capital, closeness to current American administration, for example, and these weapons of European regulations to protect its own space of rule of law and democracy had been targeted against actors who would threaten them. And I think it's very crucial also to develop in the European Union, and maybe the European Union is a privileged space for that, to privilege technodiversity. Technodiversity, meaning that we should encourage, maybe through regulation also, and differential barriers to different kinds of actors, and depending on also on their provenance, with a preference for some countries, for example. Why not? Everything is open. That should be discussed in order to allow for more sustainability. We need, it's Yuk Hui who wrote about technodiversity and cosmotechnics, and he says, we need, of course, biodiversity, that's obvious, but biodiversity is not attainable without no diversity, diversity of modes of thought and modes of thinking, and technodiversity, because without technodiversity, different ways of using algorithms, different ways of thinking about what is optimization and so on. Without that, you cannot have no diversity nor biodiversity. All these have to go together. So that must be also an object to think about when we think of European legal sovereignty. Because we are in Europe a sovereignty without state, a sovereignty made of diversity. We are prone to diversity, and we are prone to welcome a lot of different things, maybe, and we should maybe use that also. So, as for the future research, of course, these 10 years for me from Brussels, I was following often through the screen all the activities, seminars, and there was a lot of things. So, but I think maybe one thing, but it's of course very subjective. It's close to my own interest. I cannot exit from my own body. So I think one thing would be to think, rather than to think how to adapt to technological change, rather think of how this technological change and our attitude towards technological change, as if it was a state of nature, as if it was something, as if it was the new, what I call algorithmic realism. What does it change to the mode of existence of law itself? Doesn't it contaminate the mode of existence of law itself by making law itself and legislators forget of the fact that authority ultimately has to come from the generativity of the people rather than from models anticipating future threats to which the law must adapt in order to de-risk or to optimize or to compete. You see? And the question then would be, what would be a democratic mode of existence of law in a polycrisis, in a state of polycrisis? And is really the framing of our state of the world as polycritical? Isn't this framing already forcing us towards something that maybe is not optimal for sustainability? It's a question of scale. At what scale must we see and model the world? Maybe become smaller, to prefer small data and localities might bring interesting solutions that we wouldn't have envisioned if we take too broad view, broad scope, and if we observe the world from the datascape rather than from the narratives, from the contestations, and from the way that people deal with radical uncertainty.
Thank you so much. I echo everything you said, and to do a bit of self-promotion here, we recently, not so recently actually, published a report on resistance to artificial intelligence with my co-author who's sitting in the audience, and it showed us, and we didn't know what we were facing when we started, but we actually realized that there's so many bottom-up movements of resistance to technology in a way that is very meaningful and in a way actually that shapes the law as well. But it's just that these stories are not told publicly or widely. So so when I talk to people in my life, everybody's in a kind of AI nihilism or pessimism or adaptation, as opposed to actually we can do something to shape the technology or refuse it if you don't want it. So I guess this is also a call to the audience to think about technological change in a different way. But now I'll turn to Matthias. Any future? Any thoughts about the future? Anything? Any responses to what's been said? Thank you.
Thank you. I will quote from a great philosopher: "More research is needed." Oh.
I was going to say that. You stole my line.
I think that's what is happening in our digital environments. But in my view, we are also talking on many technological risks, not only AI this afternoon. I think they make more acute still 4 lines of inquiry from my standpoint. I don't claim it's shared by everyone, but we need to work more on ignorance itself in relation to uncertainty, not as absence, but as a social product, and by asking who is generating it, who is benefiting from it, and who is suffering from it, how does it circulate? So this old basic question applied to this new phenomena. Second, on mis and disinformation, you cannot go into a workshop without a panel on mis or disinformation. Of course, it's important, but as far as I can see, we need a lot more research on the actual effects on disinformation to be able to trace directly a change in opinion or in behavior to an operation of mis and disinformation. And the empirical basis of the claim is very often very loose, and so that's important if we want to reframe our relation to fostered uncertainty. Third, we don't use the word post-truth anymore. We've been using it a lot in 2016, but the thing is still with us. And so I would be interested in investigation in this situation as a condition of confusion, attention capture, certainly, and epistemic fatigue. Because we need really formal stuff, but we need also to document our stance or relationship to this uncertainty. And then there would be a fourth line. I would not have said that 10 years ago, but I think we need more research on affective atmospheres of confusion, on emotions, if you prefer. Anxiety, mistrust, disorientation, which deeply affect democratic life and political mobilizations. So that would be my 4 suggestions, and I'm sure that there will be many others. And so if I had been in a position to develop fully a talk this afternoon, I think one of my core claims would be that technological risks is always at the same time an epistemic risk. The central issue, to my mind, is not only what technologies do, which is extremely important to document, but what they do to our collective ability to inquire, to make research, to remain attentive, to pay attention together to concerns or political issues, moral issues, and to disagree in informed ways. So that would be my take-home lesson from my part.
Thank you. Doa, on to you.
Also self-infused by my own interest, but I agree with what was said before. I want to add that for us, international organizations, our role works well as a bridge between governments, their needs, and academia. But we rely on you all to give us the evidence-based research that will support our work, because we are facing a lot of countries that want to dive deeper, create national AI strategies, want to enhance the capacity of of their civil servants respond to concrete risks, like you said, misinformation and disinformation. And we, in order to guide them how to do so, we need that research that's very practical, that translates those big words that we said today into really what does it mean on the day-to-day life. And then, and yeah, I agree with you. As you said, in today's environment, it's very hard to distill the evidence base from the disinformation and the misinformation, and only good researchers and academics can support us in this journey.
Thank you. That's a good note to finish our panel on. Actually, we are officially out of time, but we start a bit late as well. So do we have time to take audience questions or not? Okay, so maybe two questions from the audience. We can take them together, and then our panel can respond, and then we can wrap up. Any questions? Any burning questions from the panel? The two hands over there. So, Mili, is that you? Go ahead, and then the other person. So, if you can say your name. I don't know if you can pass on the microphones, but if you can shout, I think that will also be fine. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for the interventions. I'm Willy Del Valle, from PhD student in the chair, and I missed one word in the very precious interventions, which is the word productivity. I associate AI mainly and fundamentally to productivity and capitalist productivity, which produces so many social disorders in societies, social, environmental destruction. So, which is the part of productivity in your reflection, and how to face it, how to effectively face it, I don't know, to destroy it?
Thank you. Maybe it's good that it wasn't there, you know, but I'll leave the panel to respond to that. There was another question over there. If you could have that question as well, and then we'll respond collectively. The person over there. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi. So I'm Chiara. I'm a student here. I had a question about LLMs, because as Doa said, it's difficult today to talk about AI and not talk about LLMs. And specifically about what Antoniette was saying about crisis in representativity, and what Matthias called a transformation in our possibility to inquire. So my question is, today our first tool to respond to uncertainty is to ask ChatGPT for information. But since ChatGPT is the kind of tool that creates answers that are not tied to someone who's thinking behind the machine, not tied to exact sources sometimes, how does that affect the way that we receive these information and the effect they have on individual and social uncertainty? Thank you.
Thank you. Matthias, would you like to start? Answer whichever question or both.
I tried to be short. Perhaps I was not clear enough, because I mean, I'm not here to write a trial of capitalism, but the fact is that AI involves not a monopoly, but very strong oligopolies. Very few people in charge of many things, and that's certainly a concern, unless the access to it is public, is shared, but we don't know. That's a major uncertainty so far. So that was not totally absent of the talk. About LLMs, I don't know. For me, the important question is, what kind of human skills can we promote? How can we use that to foster and promote and to heighten skills that we have in such a way that we still have them when we are not using the machine or the models? You know, and perhaps I don't claim it's so original, but for me it's the only way out, because there are a certain number of things that you need to be able to do unassisted. So that I think we need to think more about the way we use these things. Of course, it can be extremely useful, it can save a lot of time, but at the same time, we need to think of what we are trying to make stronger in ourselves. Otherwise, we will be replaced.
Maybe on to the
I'll also be quick. Let me pick up on this point on LLMs, as you said. I think that, well, literacy is the key, I think, for me, because I think it's true, it's unavoidable, it's there, it's good. The other day I was very impressed that my 68-year-old dad started to use ChatGPT, but then I asked him all of those questions, like, oh, but you have to check and you have to verify. Like, no, I don't have time for that, it's good. So I think it's really, the literacy is the key, because we are so, and that really brings, I think, if we don't pay enough attention, soon we will have more internet produced by LLMs than the internet that trained the LLMs. And then I think we don't put enough emphasis on explaining how to use it responsibly and safely, which is really, really risky, because if it starts from schools and from early age in schools, then we would all be tempted to use it to shorten things. But I like the example of the calculator. Nobody today will say don't use a calculator, right? Because it does save you a lot of time. But I think that most of us still are okay with doing basic math. So there is a way to do both, but I think we don't invest in enough literacy on the risks.
Antoinette, concluding thoughts?
Yeah, well.
Sorry, response to the question.
Yes, in order not to finish, I will try to infinite the question. On the question of productivity, I remember Nick Land said that there is a common teleology between cybernetics and capitalism, which is acceleration and fragmentation of all resilient forms. That's exactly what we see in LLMs and other algorithms. So there is a proliferation, of course. It's not a production. It doesn't produce anything. It proliferates. It's a proliferation of meaning. Baudrillard said that we have increasing amounts of information and decreasing amounts of meaning. He was completely wrong. In fact, algorithms and AI produce meaning like hell, and they're crazy. They produce hallucinations and so on. It's completely paranoid, because any infra-personal digital pheromone may mean something. That's a paranoid system, because it's completely disconnected from empirical reality. So it may render our society completely paranoid. On LLMs more especially, I think indeed there is a crisis of representation. Why? Because we tend to assess LLMs according to epistemic criteria, which is completely stupid from our part, because these are not epistemic machines. They generate utility and relevance. Utility and relevance has nothing to do with truth, with legitimacy, with anything else. So that's the first problem. Second problem, we have to try to find ways for our thoughts to inhabit their tools without dissolving in these tools. But nowadays, LLMs behave like epistemic viruses. They feed and extract on they're extractivist of all semiotic contents that are produced around the planet, everywhere. That everything becomes, even our language now is becoming a resource for capital accumulation. That's completely capitalistic, and it's problematic, because our language, by definition, is something that precedes us, that separates ourselves from ourselves and relates us to the others. It's fundamental. Now it's being taken by AI. That's a problem. So. We must resist the drive to autocomplete, because that's how it works. In fact, you write a prompt and you are auto-completed. But what we need for thinking is not auto-completion, it's rebuttal, it's contestation. we would need machines that would tell us, or maybe just our neighbors or colleagues, they are good machines as well, to say, no, you are not asking the right question. Your prompt is not the good one. You are asking a stupid question, and what you think is bullshit. It's something that we need from time to time, to have this kind of mirror and to see how incomplete we are. And it's not a problem, because together, when we create real collective intelligence, we can invent and imagine and create what a machine can never do.
I would like to say a lot of things on this, but unfortunately we are now definitely out of time. So please join me in thanking our panel for this amazing conversation. Thank you.